Freddie Lee Wright was a murderer with two victims on December 1st, 1977. His victims will be a 40-year-old Warren Green and 37-year-old Lois Green, who were Western Auto Store owners by shooting in Mobile County, Alabama. He was electrocuted on March 3rd, 2000. Now, welcome to the third episode of Season 4. This season on the TCL podcast, we are talking about murderers from Alabama. Um, this episode is set to come out May 21st, 2024, and if you are a Patreon member, then you have early access to this episode. I also have a merch shop that you can go and check out as well. For any update on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. With that being said, why don't we dive into today's episode, shall we? Um, this is another death row case that I have managed to come across when looking for potential topics for this season. And as most of y'all know, I am an Alabamian, born and raised, and now live in Tennessee working on my bachelor's degree. I just want to add that this is a pre-recorded episode since I am in school and I do work two jobs. However, I am researching, as when I was researching this case, I knew this would be one I was excited to talk about. Um, Now, who was Warren and Lois Green? Well, Warren and Lois Green owned and operated a Western Auto Store in Mount Vernon, Alabama. When Freddie Lee Wright, Roger McQueen, Percy Craig, Reginald Tinsley would murder them. This would also happen to be Warren's 40th birthday on December 1st, 1977, when they were murdered. They were forced at gunpoint and bound back to back with extension cords and shot in the head at point blank range. They would leave behind a daughter who was only 16 at the time, and when they were pronounced, Warren was pronounced dead at the scene, and Lois died 2 hours later at a local hospital. They made a decision to rob the store instead of going to the other town where they had intended to. One of the items stolen was Warren's new Seiko watch that his wife and daughter had gotten him the night before for his birthday. It was recovered at a pawn shop over in Mobile. Now, the state identified a handgun belonging to Roberts as the murder weapon. Months later, charges against Roberts was dropped, and the four other black men, including Freddie Lee Wright, were indicted in this case. Now, the three co-defendants named him as the shooter in the robbery, and he was tried and convicted of armed robbery and murder. Now, Wright was found guilty of his robbery of their murders in 1979 and sentenced to die in the Alabama's electric chair. Um, he also, he alongside with his accomplices were on their way to rob another store when they decided to stop in Mount Vernon to purchase tape to repair a rip in the seat of their car. They made this decision to rob the store. Instead, thank you, OneDrive. Um, Now, they made this decision to rob the store instead of going to the other town. His admitted accomplices were convicted of murder. Craig and Tinsley served their time and are now believed to be in the Mobile area. McQueen is serving time in federal prison on an unrelated kidnapping charge. So, Wright's first trial ended in a hung jury. Um, Doris Lacey Lambert, Wright's former girlfriend and the mother of his child, testified at the second trial that Wright admitted the murders of her after they were committed. Years later, McQueen recanted his testimony. On March 3rd, 2000, the state of Alabama, with the acquiescence in the federal government, executed Freddie Lee Wright in the electric chair. And now, the state and federal governments failed to ensure rights to a failed to ensure right to a fair and impartial trial. Um, rights right to so so basically they failed to ensure that along with the free of racial discrimination as well. The unfair and racially discriminatory trial resulted in his execution. Now, what are some of the issues that was brought up regarding this case? Well, his first trial ended in a mistrial, with 11 out of 12 jurors voted to acquit. There was no physical evidence that was linked to him to the crime. So, his co-defendants would testify against him in exchange for receiving a lesser sentence. Two of those co-defendants later recanted. One of them was one of them named another man as the killer. The man who originally arrested him, who was arrested for the crime, was never tried, even though his gun was identified as the murder weapon. There is no evidence the key evidence was suppressed by the prosecution, and the prosecution in his second trial excluded all African American people from serving on the jury. Now, the detective who did much of the state's investigation admitted in court that I'm not gonna say his exact word because I don't want to do that on cuss in front of a camera. But he would basically say BS his witnesses and get confessions, and then lie one of the co-defendants toward the end. Two state Supreme Court justices voted to stay Wright's execution, finding clear and convincing evidence um, of his innocence. Now let's talk about the trial, shall we? Um, the two other sorry guys, my cord is really tangled up for some reason. Anyway, two the two so it took two trials to convict Lee Wright. The first trial was a mixed race jury with 11 to 1 in favor of acquittal, resulting in a mistrial. An all white jury convicted him of armed robbery and capital murder in the second trial. Now, the prosecution in Wright's first trial relied on testimony of his two co-defendants. One later recanted his testimony, saying that the prosecutor threatened him with the electric chair if he did not name Wright as the shooter. Yeah, I know. And also, I apologize if it's a bit noisy. I'm in my living room today. My roommates are currently out of town as I'm making this video, so I have the perfect opportunity to record this episode before I go to work and get out of my room for a few minutes because we all need to get out, change the scenery from time to time, right? Anyway, um, the other later provided affidavit saying that he too was pressured by the prosecution to name Wright, the second defendant, another man, as the killer, in exchange for his testimony, but both men allowed to plead guilty to lesser charge. One received a 10-year sentence, and the other was permitted to serve his Alabama sentence concurrently with another crime in Mississippi. The third man received a 25-year sentence but was later paroled. In spite of these witnesses' testimonies at trial, a mixed-race jury voted 11 to 1 to acquit Wright of all charges, resulting in a mistrial. Now, the same witnesses the state used to convict Freddie Wright were later deemed to be non-credible witnesses when they were admitted to only had finger to avoid the death penalty. Now, let's jump to his second trial, okay? His second trial would take place before an all-white jury. The state's new witnesses was Doris Lambert, Wright's former girlfriend, and the mother of his child. She claimed Wright had confessed to his guilt to her. Although his first trial she had planned to testify for him and was never called to the stand. The prosecution would suppress Lambert's history of drug addiction and mental illness. Also, Lambert reportedly received help gain custody of their child in exchange for her testimony against Wright. Interesting. Well, I do realize I say that a lot, and I do apologize for that in advance. So, Wright's lawyers claimed that he was unable to locate a key alibi witness, an insurance agent with whom Wright did business with shortly before the murders. They discounted testimony of Wright's friends who were with him in a club at the time of the murders. Well, Wright and him were found for capital murders and sentenced to death. He just was not given a fair trial. Now let's move, which at the time this trial takes place, it's not surprising. Knowing what we know about history, especially in Alabama, I'm not shocked by this. I should be, but I'm not. Now, why don't we move on to his appeals? Wright's attorney continued to represent him in the appeals process even after claims of ineffective representation was raised. His attorney was disbarred, eventually. So the DA acknowledged that he had disclosed evidence about Doris Lambert's psychiatric history and about deals made in Wright's co-defendants. And, of course, denying Wright's habeas corpus petition, the U.S. court decided it was critical for the state's conduct. The court also that wrote that numerous imperfections in the state court proceedings were revealed. And some of those imperfections, like the state's failure to disclose certain materials, do not in any way deserve the blessing of the court. Let's just face it, Alabama, as much as I love it, it's in the South, and it's in the Bible Belt. So it does have a deep history when it comes to this kind of stuff. Um, but anyway, it is believed that the federal court was not in the proper forum to which they would retry the case. It was denied, so it denied the relief in the 11th Court of Appeals affirmed that they would virtually all these claims were procedurally barred from review because they had not first been presented in the state courts. Now, two Alabama Supreme Court justices voted that Wright's execution, citing evidence that his conviction resulted from a lack of a fair trial and the likelihood he was sending an innocent man away to his death. Wright, nevertheless, executed on schedule. So, what about the conclusion of all of his case? Well, Wright was convicted despite compelling evidence of his innocence, overwhelming evidence that he failed to receive a fair and impartial trial free from racial discrimination. Now, the state of Alabama would withhold information from the defense lawyers as well, and it is failed to provide Wright with confident legal representation. It excluded all African American people from in the jury in order to secure a conviction. A practice later found an unconstitutional form of racial discrimination. Nonetheless, both the state and federal courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, would uphold his conviction and death sentence. In his last appeal, he would write about how he admitted to being accused of two murders, and he would write about being called the trigger man of four robbery teams. He talks about being a Mobile, Alabama native, and returning to his apartment in November 1977. His fiancee Hazel Craig and their two daughters were living in Long Beach, California, and it's revealed that Reginald Tinsley was a friend of the friend for about 5 years, and he was also talked about how he worked several jobs in which he would introduce him to Percy Craig, who was no relation to his fiancee, and Roger McQueen. Now, during the week of Thanksgiving, McQueen and Craig would come over to his sister's house to invite him back to Craig's house and Thanksgiving dinner. They would drive to Pritchard, Alabama, to his ex-girlfriend Dory Lacey Lambert, who was the mother of his 2-year-old son. Doris and Craig would drive back to the apartment where he would have dinner with Craig, his girlfriend Donna Lockhart. And next time, that on November 30th, 1997, the two of them would spend most of their time at a local gambling room. In this letter, it basically reveals that everything that went down basically from his side that the prosecution did not want to allow into evidence. Why? Because they saw him, they saw the color of his skin, and wanted to basically say, hey, let's lock this man up. We need a key witness and everything. And this is deep rooted in Alabama's long standing problem when it comes to this kind of issue right here. But anyway, that's it for today's episode. I will see y'all next time. I have to get ready for work, but y'all have a great day and a happy May.